Hi, I'm Blake Rayhans.
And I'm Stacie Mallon.
And you are listening to the Optimized AF podcast.
We know life is hard. We're here to make it simple.
Hey there, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're listening to this. This is the Optimized AF podcast. My name is Blake Rayhans.
And I'm Stacie Mallon, and we are here with a guest today. It's our first Zoom virtual guest. And I was talking this morning already that we have had technology stack today.
Coming out of our ears.
We've got, we did a LinkedIn Live on the way here, and Scott Peeples is joining us this morning. Just a little background, and that is the super connector that is Mark Christensen, I believe is the first kind of connection that Scott and I had, along with Brian Moore, who was a guest on a prior podcast for us. And every Tuesday, I get to dial into a call, and that sounds very disappointing because most people are over Zoomed at this point.
Womp
Womp womp.
Every Tuesday.
But this has become something I really look forward to, and it's folks that specialize in people and culture. I guess that's how I would sort of frame it up. People that are leading the charge inside of their organizations or for multiple organizations around how to attract and retain the best talent, how to build great culture, and how to really integrate some of the principles that Brian talked about around conscious capitalism and the work that Scott does around those similar principles or same principles in the work that he does with clients. And that is really to really bring the humanity in focus for the business and how to optimize that. And today, I wanted to invite Scott on because on one of those calls a few weeks ago, Scott shared a beautiful story about his personal experience, but then transitioned into a great metaphor on how do you optimize having conversations with folks and staying curious and helping people feel seen and feel heard, and how do you also stay engaged where I always say that the best thing that Bill Clinton the skill that Bill Clinton did the best is called like the belly button test, where when he's talking to someone.
You took this to a whole different place.
Here we go.
I thought you would. Okay, here we go, people.
Right out of the gate.
Buckle up.
So when someone talks to you and their belly button is facing you, that's called the belly button test. And that's where people feel the most engaged and present inside of the conversation. But now we're all on Zooms and we're all virtual, and it's challenging when you're on a Zoom call and not in front of someone. How do you really listen intently to understand, to explore, to have a better conversation? So Scott, for me, wrap this into a story and a metaphor that I'm going to use probably forever, because I think it was probably the easiest way to get leaders to really understand how to do that. Because again, it's not about the what. We can talk about all day long the what. It's people need to know the how, especially right now. They're struggling. They're going into these one-on-one conversations with people with their own baggage and their own stuff and their own concerns. How do you show up for someone that is on your team or your leader or whomever, if you got a kiddo doing school behind you and you just got all these things going on? So Scott, tell us a little bit about your work and your background, and then also dive into this. Now, again, I always do this, so much build up, so it better be amazing. Sorry, about this story. Would love to hear the story itself, because Blake's never heard the story.
And Scott, you're joining us all the way from Florida today.
Yeah, Jacksonville, Florida.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the Optimized AF podcast. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Great. Well, thanks for having me on, y'all. This was a lot of fun. The quick version is that I'm sort of a chronic entrepreneur. I can't seem to get away from business and kind of starting things from scratch, where my passion really lies. Got out of a startup that I've been working on for about 8 years, 2 years ago. And since then have really just sort of doubled down on the things that I felt were essential, and a lot of the lessons that I had seen from working with other startups. And that really goes to culture. especially culture in the sense, not just of inside your company, but sort of the culture you exude when you interact with your stakeholders and how you are sort of part of a community when you operate in the company. So really understanding and optimizing human potential, I think sort of characterizes it. But yeah, that call we do every week has been a real source of joy and comfort during this COVID times, being able to see familiar faces and connect.
Absolutely. And I just really starting to demonstrate more and more vulnerability on that call we did. We went through Anthem this week. Brian talked a little bit about that process, and we went into breakout rooms and
Which,
shared.
if I can, for the listener, if you listen to Brian's episode, we probably refer to that as Life Tracks.
That's right.
And so there was a brand change, and so now it is known as Anthem.me, I believe is still what it is. Anthem.me or Anthem.co.
And it's Anthem with a Y.
Yeah, all kinds of.
And I love that connection to rhythm. Rhythm and music is so critical. So we did that process. So on this call, and Scott, I don't know what room you were in, but the breakout that I was in just had I had Jen K, and I had Trina in that room, and it was such a good group of people. And every time I just enjoy hearing more about people's stories. I told a story of Here Comes the Sun, that song, and I used to sing that to my daughter every time I'd walk into her nursery when she was a baby. And when she started talking, she started doing the do 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 back to me in that song. So as soon as I hear that song, I'm like, my little girl, who's now taller than me and has a 14-year-old attitude, she loves when I mention her on the podcast too, by the way. You're welcome, Jocelyn. It's like, don't talk about me. So, Scott, I have a lot of gratitude for you guys starting that Tuesday call. It has been a light and a beacon for me during this time. And a few weeks ago, one thing you talked about was this interesting story. We're not going to go down this road, but this interesting story about words are either windows or walls. And that was awesome. That metaphor was awesome. So we'll save that for maybe another day. But then this story about your journey and travels to Prague, I think, is where you started the story.
Yeah. And it's funny, as a kind of jumping off from Brian, and I think it's Anthem.life, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny how much we compartmentalize ourselves in our lives. And when we show up in business, we tend to show up in sort of certain prescribed ways. And so that exercise, like Life Tracks, Anthem, what they do, starts to break down those walls and realize that our full humanity can show up at work. It might be a little uncomfortable at first, but there's a lot to just letting the edges bleed a little bit and come together. So that's one of the things to kind of preface this story, because in 2020, like all of us, my travel has been vastly restricted, and I've really always loved traveling and getting out there. And there's just something magical that happens when you travel, and I think we all have had that experience where it just feels like serendipity shows up. There's just these amazing experiences you didn't expect, and maybe there's some frustrations where plans change last minute, but it ends up being this amazing thing you couldn't predict at the plan. And one of the stories that always comes to mind when I think about traveling is this time I had gone to Prague with a friend of mine whose family was from Slovakia. He had deep roots there. He had spent about 6 months in a study abroad program in Prague, and we were kind of traveling across the country. I was playing music. He's a videographer, so it was a very art heavy kind of trip. And it was one of these days that was just exemplifies traveling, right? Because we started the day going to a cemetery, actually, because his twin brother liked to collect rubbings of tombs, a famous tomb. And so
I love cemeteries, by the way. Does that make me weird? I like to go look at cemeteries too. Is that like a thing?
Yeah, no,
they're just fascinating.
Moving right along.
Belly button cemeteries. I don't know what you're going to.
Look, I'm having a win.
Yeah, but anyway, so we went to the cemetery. It was raining. We had to jump a fence to get back there and be able to get this rubbing. And it actually was Dvorak's tomb. Dvorak is sort of the most celebrated Czech composer. Mm-hmm. And we were actually going to go see the Czech Philharmonic play Dvorak that evening. So it was already this kind of tie-in that was happening. And, we're out in the city and it's beautiful castles. It's one of these cities that really wasn't touched by the war. So it doesn't have hardly any damage. You're really getting left back in time when you're there. And, we're kind of wandering down from the castle district after we got this rubbing. We kind of duck into some little alley he knew about there where they had a beautiful restaurant. And it's just moment after moment that was just surprising and awesome, And so from there, we basically like found a little cafe kind of in the corner as the sun was starting to set over the castle. And we're drinking a Pilsner, which is a beer that was invented in the Czech Republic. He's telling me stories about his family, and the sun goes down, and we move into the theater, and completely again talk about serendipity. Without planning this, it turns out that 6 rows behind us in the seats we had for the concert that night was the professor who had led his study abroad program 10 years ago, and he just happened to be there that night. And, after that day of kind of wandering the city, like touching the Dvorak's tomb and hearing the stories of what, he meant to that people and to Yarrow personally, it was just the most moving experience of music I think I've ever had, because it had just been nothing but giving me context all day. And then to be there with this very dear friend. And it's that kind of a moment that I would come back to the States, and this is for years now. I've thought, what is it about when I'm traveling that changes my mindset so much? Why do I feel like I stumble on just excitement and adventure and wonderful times when I'm anywhere but home, And I thought, this idea that the expectations we put on ourselves, right? Because when I'm home, I feel like all I can do is be disappointed by things not going as planned. I have the restaurant I want to go to. I have the menu item I'm going to order. And if anything gets in my way, now I'm just frustrated. Whereas when I'm traveling, I'm just open to new experiences. I'm sort of in this posture of being surprised by things I didn't expect, and not in a pleasant way, kind of this eager uncertainty. But the thing that struck me recently in 2020, not being able to travel, is what if we took that same posture and that same attitude into our relationships and into conversations with other human beings, where I don't sort of have that I'm at home mindset where everything's got to go according to plan, but instead I am discovering something new. I'm, positioning my sort of heart and my attitude to be curious and sort of, be changed by this experience, kind of preparing for local language and customs. I mean, think of all the things we do to prepare for traveling. And what if I just shifted my whole mindset of going into meetings, going into conversations, as if I was being taken on this tour of a foreign country? So that's kind of that core idea that, for me, it started to really unlock my relationships a lot and made Zoom a lot more pleasant when I can start to think of it like this is my chance to travel, to see something, to see the world through someone else's eyes.
Yeah, there's so much value in that. I think about what the idea of home, right? It's just it's the familiarity of it, and of course, with the familiarity, we take things for granted. With that, we're not intentional and purposeful in our actions. And I love the analogy because you're absolutely right. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday before we, kind of in our prep for this show, is that when we're going on vacation, we're going to visit somewhere, we put so much effort into the preparation for it. I want to know, like you said, Scott, the local language a little bit, at least a little bit to be able to, navigate how to order something, or where do I locate this particular place, whatever the case may be. You're researching things to do, people to see, things to research. You want, with this childlike curiosity, to take in as much as you possibly can, and you have such a valuable perspective in doing that research. You're such a student, I'll use that word, in the place that you're going to go to. But we don't do that when we prepare to engage with a person. It's very passive. So I love the metaphor.
And I'll give you another practical business application. I've been in recruiting, talent acquisition, whatever, for my whole career. That's where I started my career. And I always really connected. I always viewed every interview as an opportunity to get to know someone who I didn't know before, right? And so I think I always just sort of had a fascination with interviewing that maybe other people doing that role didn't, because I ended up having more conversational interviews with people. I had, people would tell me things they probably wouldn't tell other people during interviews, because I think maybe it just felt a little bit more genuine. And I had an experience that came to mind the other day, because I remember the morning of 9/11. This is the week after that, right now when we're recording this podcast. But the week of 9/11, I went in and I had actually had interviews scheduled that day. And I was at the gym when the first plane hit, the second plane hit. I remember everybody stopped their treadmills. It was the most eerie, you could hear a pin drop kind of situation. But all I could think about is somebody was showing up at the office for an interview. So I went and got ready and went into the office, and my leader wasn't there. There was nobody there. So I was like, okay, well, but he showed up, and it came to mind because I didn't do the interview that day, but we spent an hour just talking to each other about he when I arrived, he was just terrified. I think he just thought, well, I have to be here. I have to do this interview. This is really happening. I have no idea, so I find out that he has family in New York, so he was sitting there waiting for this interview just as a human being, thinking, how am I going to get through this when my mind is somewhere else? My mind was somewhere else. My stepdad is an airline pilot, so of course I was thinking, where is he? And we also had friends in New York. So it just came to mind the other day that I think part of, and I still to this day recruit and interview as part of what I do for clients, because I just love it. I think talent selection is one of the most critical things we do for culture, is selecting who's coming into the organization. Let's be realistic. Like, if you're not picking the right people, it doesn't really matter what else you're doing, in my opinion. But so I love doing interviews to this day. And I think after that experience on 9/11, very similar to what you're talking about, Scott, I always really viewed, even more than I ever did, every time, not only am I respectful of the person's time that I'm talking to, regardless of the role or the opportunity or position or the timing or whatever, respecting the person who's in front of me, but hearing somebody's story, really hearing their story with curiosity, hearing their story about what has their life and their experience been like. So I think that's another application of this when we think about being a leader, being in business, how you select talent. Are you looking at every even interview? And today there's a lot, I'll use it in quotes, a lot of talent on the market. There are a lot of people that were displaced. People are still paying attention to how they're being treated during that process, how leaders are showing up for people inside of business. So I think that it's a great reminder. What do you tell people, Scott? How do they do that? What is the practical how, right? This is a mindset, right? The mindset of, like you're traveling. So what are some...
You have to shift and think about, how am I going to engage with this person in the same aspect that I treat a travel? So Scott, to that point, when you had come home and you're like, well, gosh, why don't I treat these engagements the same way that I approach travel? What was it like the first time you tried to apply it? What was the barriers and the hurdles that you had to get through when you're like, let me treat this engagement like I'm traveling to this destination?
Yeah, I think the thing that immediately pops up is, when you're traveling, you don't have enough information to have expectations of what it should look like or what it could look like. So when you make a plan, it's inherently a loose plan, because that's the best you can do. But when I'm home, I'm pretty sure I can plan it down to the letter, and I can have everything look a certain kind of way. So I feel like anytime you're looking to change, it starts with letting go of the status quo, and letting go of the usual patterns you fall into. So for me, that is this exercise in preemptively being okay with things not going the way I expect, and sort of looking for the surprises and those changes, things not going the way I thought they would, as a chance to see something I've never seen before, to appreciate something I have before. There's actually a lot of neuroscience around the way we can open up our broad attention rather than our focused attention. Our focused attention is generated by the left hemisphere of the brain. It tends to, be very cause and effect, very sequential. I want to do this so that I get that. Whereas the right hemisphere generates this much broader, take in the kind of big picture context of what's happening. And it's just naturally more geared towards gratitude. So there's sort of an exercise in letting go of expectation that I think helps practically, not only when you're home, but in those conversations as well. One thing I like to think about is, especially in business, right? We have, if you're a manager, let's say, and you're interacting with somebody from a particular department, we create these stereotypes of what a programmer is, or what a marketer is, what a salesperson is. And we interact with people inside that department as if they are all cut from the same cloth, and I think of it like you're trying to navigate New York City with a map of Chicago because it's another city, like these are completely different places, completely different people. So a lot of it is letting go of our maps, letting go of the roles and the categories we try to lump people in, and really having that child's mind, like you said, to just be surprised, learn this person from the ground up rather than coming in with an assumption.
I'd imagine that was, well, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, was that uncomfortable the first time that you applied it with really letting go of all that to something that maybe prior to that you might have felt very familiar with? Like you said, you probably could have planned everything out to the T or to the letter. So what was that experience like for you?
Well, I mean, it is very much an ongoing experience. This is not like I've crossed the border and now I always operate this way. I mean, it's so natural for us to let expectations and stories seep in that become what we operate from. We draw maps. As human beings, we draw maps of how to navigate the world. It's just that you have to hold it a little bit looser. So I think what I try to do in this is, it's not that I'm not going to have a map. It's not that I'm going to completely abandon my expectations. I just have to hold them a little looser and keep my eyes on the trail and not on the map.
I like that. It's much more directional. I'm reminded now, you said the word map, and I immediately thought of, and Stacie and actually, the company that we worked for when we met had these things. Okay, so it was literally a physical map for people. It was a tool called Personalysis. And like a lot of those assessments, you answered some questions and it spit out an assessment of you and said, you know what, you're a rational thinker. You're a person that likes to receive a lot of information. You're a this, you're a that. And you got this little map that you were to place on your desk. And the idea behind it was that anybody walking into your office could take a look at your map and know how to best engage with you.
Did you know I never printed mine out?
I saw it
there might
used
be a reason.
Absolutely 0 times.
Right.
It never got used. And in concept, it seemed like a really great idea. And there's a lot of science behind it. I'm not knocking the tool. Actually, the assessment was spot on. I looked at mine and I'm like, absolutely. On paper, that's me. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that does not tell the whole story. And I think that was such a missing gap with that map. It was not how you should engage with me in every single situation. It might be some good guardrails. Let me put it that way. Right.
It's a tool.
Yeah,
it's a tool in the big picture.
Yeah. So with this mindset shift, Scott, how does, because I think a lot of people out there probably have done one of those assessments, whether it's Personalysis, Predictive Index, Clifton Strengths, there's a ton of them out there. If you're part of an organization right now and you're saying, hey, this is an interesting metaphor. How do I apply this? My organization uses this map. Where does that fit into this journey, as you put it? Because it is an evolution to get sort of to mastery on this, but where do those maps fit in?
I think maybe the way to think about maps is that they are for navigating, right? So it should almost give you questions rather than answers. So rather than looking at the map to tell you what to do, it should tell you what to wonder about. It should tell you what to ask, or at least a place to start, with conversations. But I have mixed feelings, put it lightly, on the personality testing, because it's an addiction, right? We want to put people in boxes. We want to put ourselves in boxes and sort of get an understanding, but human beings just are not that simple. And some of the other practical things here, because it really is it's about a mindset shift away from certainty is really what it comes down to. So things that you can do to try to practice that ethos is things like look at your calendar a week ahead and try to evoke the same feeling you get when you're planning a trip. Think about where do I get to go this week? Where am I traveling this week? and really try to capture that place, because we know that feeling, that vacation anticipation feeling. Try to capture it. Try to find that mindset and make you tap into the anticipation of a conversation in that same way. And then there's little things, little reminders you can put around your desk, like put your passport by your desk, put a little travel bag, any little ritual maybe that you do that helps you be in a vacation mindset. Try to do that. And even on the back end, as a journaling exercise, make a travel diary. After you go through the week or at the end of the day, talk about your trip. Talk about what you learned, what was surprising, what was beautiful, what didn't you expect, what caused some friction in you. The same way, you might if you were, out able to travel.
God, I like that idea so much, because I even think about myself. I cannot count how many times I get to a Friday and there's a release, right? It's like you made it. You sort of get through 5 o'clock on a Friday, and there's this like finish line to the week that you cross over, and you just immediately put the whole week away. Done. Don't think about it. It's over. There's no active retrospective of, hey, you know what? Let me take a look back. Where did I go? Who did I see? What did I do? What did I learn? What questions if you even just put on your calendar, get real practical with it right now, listening to this, go to your calendar, set a repeat recurring every week, Friday, 5 o'clock for 30 minutes. You can do 30 minutes for yourself to look retrospectively at the week. And as Scott put it, what curiosities did you have? What did you learn? What questions did you ask? Did you stumble upon anything new that you didn't think you would? And then I think it also is a great practice to do the same thing sort of in that Sunday evening-ish, planning the week ahead. What's in front of me? Because I can say right now, I've got a vacation plan, my wife and I with some friends of ours, another couple, that's still 7 months out. 7 months out. We have a group text that text has activity on it probably on a weekly basis.
Yep.
And it's nothing more than us sending each other emojis of palm trees and margaritas but think about what that is though. If you applied that same excitement to how you engage with people throughout your week, your month, the positivity and the value is completely different than how we just sort of bump and bounce around. Very unintentionally sometimes. I think there's an inner circle that we might do a little more planning for, but outside of that inner circle, I think you sort of just, like I said, bump and bounce very haphazardly.
Well, and I think, Scott, you mentioned, your right hemisphere is where gratitude is more prevalent. And I think that's a good thing to tap into as well. I think I try to have a daily practice of gratitude, but again, that can be challenging for people to institute. So maybe as part of this journaling, maybe just a few things that you were grateful for, experiences that you had. But I also highly encourage you to start tapping more into what were the things that lit your fire that week. What are the things that felt really good? I think Brian talked a little bit about this. We've talked to Tom about this. Leaders are creating the workplace that they want to work in, but what does that look like? So I think this is a great exercise to create this travel journal, and then find some gratitude in that space. If you're new to that practice, it's a good place to do it. And also just really pay attention to what felt the best that week. It doesn't mean you don't do things that don't feel great. I mean, we all have our stuff that aren't our favorite things. Maybe when you're a billionaire that you don't have to do that, but I think maybe they still do. So I think though, focusing on where you're grateful and what lit you up. What other takeaways do you have, Scott, before we wrap this segment, for people that you've found are valuable or practical related to this?
Well, and really, I just invite people to chew on the metaphor and really what it means to them, because I think seeing through a metaphor is where the power comes rather than being sort of told the specifics. But one thing we haven't touched on is when I travel, I'm mindful of boundaries. I'm mindful of not going into spaces where I am not safe. So it's not that I'm going to march into someone's life and be like, tell me everything. Tell me about your children. Tell me the most personal aspects of your life. There are places that I need to be aware of, like, nope, I don't need to go everywhere. So there's that side, and then there's also a flip of the same way that I should be thinking of like going in and traveling in other people's countries. How am I being a tour guide of my own country? How am I being vulnerable to take people around the places in me that are special? I don't want to be the kind of person who always does business at the airport, by that metaphor. I'd rather get out and talk about life and, how to do that responsibly for yourself too. I think that's something to think about, showing up in a way where you make yourself just as available for a traveler as you are to them.
And again, now more than ever, because people, you're sitting in your home, Scott, we see what's behind you. I think this thought process that we've had for early stages of our career, where there's this separate life, this separate person, this separate identity. I'm very grateful for what's happened in the last 7 or 8 months, because I think we are more than ever dispelling the fact that you lead separate lives. Human beings it's inside out. Where you are at home should be how you show up in every other place of your life. You should be showing up just as amazing for your family and your significant other, your children, your whomever, your pets, as you do when you go to work, and vice versa. And the talk of loving what you do, loving who you work with, being passionate about all those things. I think we're going to come out of this where people feel like it's more relevant than it's ever been, and there's going to be less shame. And let's just say it, there's been historical shame in believing that that's really important. And those of us who have been navigating that space for 10 plus years, so as we've talked about before, really talking about this stuff, and people still being resistant. So that's my hope for this time and this place. And that but still want to get back to the original premise behind the Tuesday meeting, Scott, was to do an in-person event. And I personally am hoping that still happens. And now, again, especially now that I have spent on a weekly basis an hour with those folks during this time, I hope we are able to get together and do an in-person. That would be amazing.
Oh yeah, I can't wait. Definitely someday.
It's exciting, and you get to fly in from Florida if it's here, and or wherever we hold it. I think it would be awesome. So I want to I'm grateful for you spending your time with us today and this morning, and sharing your story. And where can people find you? Where's the best channel to reach you on and hear more about what you do and how you can help folks optimize this aspect of their business and life?
Probably the best place to connect for that is going to be straight through LinkedIn. There's another project I'm working on called the Stakeholder Score. So if they go to stakeholderscore.com, they can see one of this projects that's trying to help companies repair their relationship with stakeholders. So there's another version of this same approach. But yeah, would love to connect.
Great. Well, we will tag you and that and all those things in this episode and on iTunes and LinkedIn and all of our social channels.
And in listening to this episode, please, we highly encourage you to find someone that that you can plan ahead for, someone that you are going to meet with in this upcoming week after you're listening to this episode, and try this on for size. Give it a go. Be graceful. Give yourself grace. It's not going to be, probably easy at first, but try to have that mentality, that mindset shift of treating that interaction as you would with that same childlike curiosity of traveling to a new place where you're lowering down your expectations. You're not trying to plan everything out. And I love the part that you said, Scott. I hope people really internalize this. Ask more questions. Use the map as a guide to navigate, but it should create more curiosity than anything else.
Yep. So thank you, Scott. I will see you soon. I'll see you next Tuesday, and we will talk to you guys out in the audience next week.
Take care.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to our show. You can find Blake and I on social media channels at Blake Greyhans and at Stacie Mallon.
Be sure to follow Optimized AF on Instagram and rate and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. See you next time.